Welcome back. Advocates for Children of New York is an organization that's dedicated to protecting every child's rights with education, focusing on students from low-income backgrounds who are struggling in school or experiencing school discrimination of any kind. Now, the organization recently released a new data analysis estimating more than 300,000 public school students do not have a parent that speaks English fluently. Joining me now and sharing more, we got staff attorney at Immigrant Students Rights Project of Advocates for Children, Diana Aragundi. And Diana, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Daren.
And so automatically from the jump, when we look at the fact that a student doesn't have a parent that actually speaks English fluently, translate that into the difficulties it is in navigating through the educational process.
Of course, definitely. When we have students whose parents do not speak English fluently, it means that their ability to communicate meaningfully with their child's school, get information about how their child is doing in school, get information about what's happening at the school is limited, right? And so what we really noticed was that, especially during the pandemic, with everything being remote, so many of our families, so many of our immigrant families did not have access to the information the same way other families do. And in addition, other factors, including like digital literacy, access to broadband internet access, meant that so many families were just basically kept out of the education process. So they weren't able to log in and see how their child was progressing. They weren't getting report cards. They weren't getting announcements. And a lot of families were reaching out to us very frustrated because they weren't able to participate in their child's education. So, our data analysis shows that there's broad swathes of families that are being kept out and not able to meaningfully participate in their child's education. And even though we are back in school, we see these issues continue to be out there. So we want to make sure that immigrant families are able to participate in their children's education.
Yeah, I have the statistic that the estimated 55,585 students have parents that have no more than an 8th grade education. So when we talk about navigating the school system, even though a parent can be present, sometimes to be able to assist them in their day-to-day classwork or navigating this system can be really complex.
Definitely. And also, if we talk about the DOE has put a lot of information online, right? A lot of the information is translated into 9 covered languages. But if you have a parent who doesn't have an education, no more than 8th grade education, a lot of those documents are very technical and difficult to access for a lot of our immigrant families. And so it's unfortunate because families need different types of approaches. They need a multifaceted approach to get information. They need information that's accessible and really meant for broad families, not just for families that are able to interpret the information that the DOE is sharing. So we have noticed that is a challenge, and we would like to see more information in different types of media, ethnic media, different forms of language. So it's not just a lot of for families that have difficulty with literacy, videos. There's so many other ways to reach families than just putting things online. And we know that for a lot of our families, they're not getting there.
Yeah. So you had this report and we saw the numbers that came out of it. Talk to us about the report and some of the findings that you found coming from this.
Definitely. So we did a data analysis using the U.S. Census Bureau American Community Survey for the 2020-2021 school year. So as you mentioned before, about 30% or 329,000 of New York City public school students have a parent who does not speak English fluently. We estimate out of that, there's an estimated 55,585 students whose parents do not have more than an 8th grade education. And estimated 61,657 students are children of limited English proficient parents, and they live in a household with no access to broadband or internet access. This is obviously really, really it has become even more important, right? As we've moved from COVID and being remote to being in this hybrid environment where a lot of students are still using the iPads and the devices they got during the pandemic. And then we also estimated that about 29,608 students have parents who are have limited English proficiency and also speak in languages outside of the top 9 languages that the DOE typically routinely translates all documents. So we have clients who speak Mixteco, who speak Quechua, who speak languages that are not, covered or low incidence languages, and maybe speak Spanish as their 3rd language. And so these families are being kept out of being able to meaningfully participate as well.
So when we look at this here, obviously a lot of work needs to go forward. Your organization is front and center, really dealing with the matters. Talk to us about the work that you're doing right now and trying to bridge this gap.
Definitely. So a lot of the work, there is a work group that was last year there was funding, there was $4 million in funding to bridge this gap, and AFC is a part of that work. And a lot of that funding was targeted towards going into using local ethnic media so that they could provide updates from the Department of Education, conversations about sending paper notices to families, reaching families over the telephone and text messages, as well as collaborating with community-based organizations, CBOs, the organizations that families trust. And so a lot of that work continues, and we're encouraged that the Department of Education, that the city has renewed the ask, and there is now $4 million in the budget for this upcoming fiscal year. And we're encouraged by that, and we really think that immigrant family communications need to continue. We need to continue, even as we're moving away from this remote world. We need to continue to prioritize immigrant family communications so that families feel encouraged and feel like they can participate meaningfully in their child's education.
So there's some money that was allocated, $4.4 million, I should say, base funding for the program. Talk to us about how this has been able to assist.
So yes, so as I mentioned before, a lot of that money has been going into community-based organizations so that they can work directly with families in their language. And so we are encouraged by the DOE and by the City Council in recognizing that this is important and a priority. We are, hopeful that this coming year we'll be able to continue having diverse methods of communicating with families, having this multifaceted approach, which includes using ethnic media, which includes paper documents. A lot of our families just do not have access to the internet or would not know how to access documents online. And so being able to communicate with families and meet them where they are is of utmost importance.
Yeah. So when we look at what's going on right now, there is this gap that you're trying to bridge. A lot of families are really struggling in this area. How are you going about locating these families to be able to help and assist?
So at Advocates for Children, we have families, a lot of the families that we work with, whether they reach out directly to our helpline or through community-based organizations that refer families to us, we're able to work with families directly in that way. We also have relationships with CBOs. And so a lot of families are reaching out to their community-based organizations. They're reaching out to their, to people that they trust. And that is how we're getting the information, right? A lot of the anecdotal information I'm sharing today is really because of those relationships that we've established. And we know that if we're talking to a few families and they're experiencing this issue, we know it must be more families are experiencing this issue. So we want to make sure that we speak for the families that are not reaching us, right? We know that there's so many others that don't know and therefore being kept out.
Are you pleased, or I should say satisfied with the fact that, elected officials and also the Department of Education is really recognizing that this is a growing need, and the fact that so many people are being literally caught in the mix here, and the fact that also you've got families that are trying to make the best educational life for their child, but sometimes just don't have the resources or the capacity to be able to bring it home?
Yes, we're very appreciative and encouraged that the funding was renewed for this year. We did ask for, our ask was for 6 million. We are encouraged that the city has decided to renew the 4 million that was in the budget last year. And we are always encouraged, and we want to continue working with the Department of Education and with our community-based organizations to keep pushing for greater help and greater support for our immigrant families. The families that I work with on a daily basis are so invested in their children, and they're invested in their children's success. They need help communicating. They need access to their schools, and increasing families' ability to communicate with their schools is really is paramount to that success.
Yeah. And so for yourself, obviously, you're pretty dedicated to this work and knowing the needs that are affecting the immigrant community. Talk to me about how this has really been impacted since COVID, because I think COVID definitely further exacerbated a lot of things. But for you, what's been your take on things since COVID? Have you seen a greater increase in need?
Definitely. COVID, I think what COVID did was it definitely highlighted not just the literacy divide or the communication divide, but also the digital divide, right, between our families. So many of our families do not have access to broadband internet, do not have speak other languages, and had a really hard time, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, to access information. And so, at Advocates for Children, we worked with families, we created guides, we walked them through, we got on FaceTime and helped them, log into Google Classroom and figure out how to access, their learning platforms for their children. And while that's no longer where we are now, right, with children back in school, so our families continue to tell us that they don't know what's going on because they're not getting things in the mail. They're not getting letters that come in, or if the letters come in from school, they're in English, or they don't know what's happening with, the meetings are still occurring by phone. You're not going into schools for parent-teacher conferences. And so it is really challenging for families that do not speak English fluently to advocate for their children. So it's very important that we continue to explore different avenues so that families are able to communicate meaningfully with their child's school.
Diana, I wish you could share a little bit more, because you also do some work with Immigrant Students Rights, and there's an Immigrant Students Rights Project. Can you make our viewers a little bit more aware of that?
Definitely, yes. So I am a staff attorney on the Immigrant Students Rights Project. We work with immigrant families and immigrant students in New York City schools. We help families enroll children in bilingual education programs and appropriate English language learner programs. We also help with special education needs. And so we have students who require special education classes. We provide trainings and workshops for the community. And we also take on direct legal representation for families who require that. So we do a host of different things, and we work with low-income families who need that support.
And so for people who want to find out more information, get connected with the work that you do, how do they go about doing that?
Definitely. So for families who are interested and have access to the internet, they can go to our website at advocatesforchildren.org. We also have a helpline that families or anyone can call if they have any education related issue. They can contact us at 866-427-6033.
And right now, what would you identify as the biggest challenge that you're trying to overcome?
Well, I mean, that's a very broad question. And I feel like it depends, right, on the day of the week and which family I'm working with. I do think communication is central to a lot of the issues that our families experience, because whether it's a special education issue or a student who is learning English and needs an appropriate and effective English language learner program, families are not, if they're not able to communicate with the schools effectively, if they're not able to be informed of the choices they have, a lot of decisions happen without their input. And so being able to have increased like transparency with communication and access for families is really, I think, one of the major issues that we experience, and one of the ways that we try to help families.
So when we talk about families, obviously we know that so many of them are saddled with so many different things they're trying to contend with. Sometimes it's, food insecurity, things like that, and just really surviving on day to day. But can you give us a little bit of insight into what it means to have this language barrier, because and how that really plays out in the life of the people that you serve?
Definitely. And yes, and I want to uplift that so many of our families are going through housing insecurity, food insecurity. And they, especially with COVID, so many families lost their jobs, right? A lot of our families weren't working, and have other ancillary issues that also affect them besides their child's education. And so it can be very challenging for families to juggle all that. I think, for a lot of our families, like not being able to communicate with their schools is very frustrating, and it's very difficult because they are so invested. And so I've had families try to communicate using Google Translate. I've had them try to communicate, with going in person and trying to find someone at the school that can interpret for them. It becomes very challenging when you have a parent who works full time and can't go to the school. And a lot of schools are not open, right, for people to come in because of COVID. So it is like a daily struggle for a lot of families, especially when they are interested, they want to know how their child is doing, they want their child to make progress. And so it's difficult. And it's an ongoing issue. And obviously, like any other thing, some schools are better at it than others, but we want this to be something across the board, right? We want something that is across the board a good experience for families, so that it doesn't matter if you go to a school where there's better communication. All schools should be providing immigrant families with multi-faceted approaches so that they can feel like they're part of the community.
Diana Aragundi, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your work, and thank you for being here on the Social Justice Forum.
Thank you for having me.
All righty. Well, we want you to stay with us. We do have more show. Don't go anywhere. We're continuing right after this.